Hey everyone, I'm Valentina Flores, CEO of Red Century, and this is the Ctrl-Alt-Secure podcast where we talk all things cybersecurity. And we have an awesome guest on today. I'm excited because I think we're going to get some real talk, real opinions. Brianna Martinson, she is the managing partner and director of engineering for Tepia, and they're building software all day, every day. And really excited to have her on today to talk about how we're building apps and maybe some things we should be doing differently in that process. So, Brianna, thanks for joining. If you want to kind of give your intro and what Tepia does and your background.
Beautiful. Thank you for the introduction, Valentina. Hello to all of those listeners out there. My name is Brianna Martinson, and tech is my passion. It's my life. I was a developer for many years, and now I am more of a manager. At Tepia, we do custom software, but more than that, we are very people focused. And what I mean by that is we are partners throughout the whole system. So it's not just building one particular piece of software, but bigger than that. We're looking at your entire system, optimizing the flow for not only your end users, but also your business itself. Because if it doesn't work efficiently for you, then what's the point of it at all?
Yeah, I think it's so important, and I love the concept of like the human versus the tech and who's to blame, and it's something I think about all the time because I think in real life we have bad UX, bad designs all the time that are just annoying. Like something will be built for parents, but you have to like have 10 hands free and it just doesn't make sense. Or like the fact that crash test dummies didn't use women mannequins until like a couple years ago, like that kind of thing. And I think in the real world we get really annoyed by it and it's the design's fault. And then I think in tech, we've kind of adopted this like it's always the user's fault, like user error gets thrown around quite a bit. And it's something on the security side that we always say like the people are the weakness. And, I think it's important to challenge that concept and really talk about if products should be built around humans or vice versa. So at a high level, when you think about like great engineering, you came from a developer, now you're managing it. So what does that mean to kind of build systems around humans?
It really starts from the approach, the design and discovery process at the beginning. Y- You have to think of what the end is going to even look like. I love that you bring up real life example because it's so much easier to portray that. Like we've all been at an intersection where it's not clear where to turn, and you're frustrated and there's pedestrians walking around and you're not thinking about, clearly that engineer did not
Yeah.
think about the whole system. Well, it's the same concept whenever it comes into tech. If it's not intuitive, it's really not usable. So typically our design process ends up being just as long and potentially longer than the development process itself, because you've heard measure twice, cut once. Well, measure twice from every perspective. Who's touching this piece of tech? Is somebody going to accidentally go in the wrong place? Well, there's really no such thing as accident. You just didn't think about that person.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny. Like back to a real world example, like it's not like just because something works doesn't mean it works like in that place. And a good example that I was just thinking about the other day was Florida recently got we have the Bright Line train. And it's, we have the train tracks, we have the bars that go down, but Florida typically doesn't have many trains. It doesn't have a lot of like fast trains. And so they put it in the same way they do trains tracks in other locations. And then, all these pedestrians started like dying and all these car crashes. And it became this big thing the first year it was out. And people are like, well, it had the bar. And it's like, yes, but people from Florida don't know how fast trains come. And like, it was just like
Mhm.
this, you still have to think about the person and still there's like a teaching element or an education element or designing around that person, it's yeah, it's definitely not always the person's fault, but I think there's that wrong perception that if it works for this, cool, ship it, it works. and it's definitely not the case.
I mean, to be candid, from the development or engineering standpoint, I completely understand it. It is so much
Mhm.
easier not to think that way. I don't want to call it lazy, but it is a challenging problem in and of itself. Going back to this train example, to build this
Yeah.
new train line, that's a hard task on its own. Oh, now you want to throw in the complexity of another, the users and stuff. I get it, but we have to do that. That
Yeah,
is
and
part of the job.
what's funny is a phrase that we hear all the time is like, "You don't know what you don't know." But, like,
Mm,
you also can't unknow what you know. So I find
this is
with, like,
true.
developers and the hackers on my team and these super technical people, what they're saying they think is super, like, basic. Like, they think, like, "Okay, I made this as simple as I can make it." And it's like, "Yes." But that is still insanely complicated. And we have that debate all the time, and I think, to engineers' points, I mean, the reason we hire these engineers is because they're brilliant and they're good at what they do and they can do this thing, and that UX, product manager, product marketer, like, that kind of side of the house is often really underestimated.
Yeah, or beneficial to have a non-technical person
Oh,
on a
100%.
technical team.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, I mean, our sales team stress tests this stuff more than any other person. So, and we make fun of them, but it's actually like really good for our process. When they're designing systems, is there like a certain area that's usually either misjudged or overlooked, or a certain area that kind of has that bias or should be looked at more?
Hmm. I think leveraging reusable components, such as thinking of what are they already familiar with?
Hmm.
So, because we already do this as engineers, but we have to also consider it from the user's point of view. For example, like a nav bar is always at the top or it's at the left hand side. And we approach things like that on an engineering point of view, but we also must approach this with what does the user already know that we can
Yeah.
leverage? Text fields, whenever they're done right, are so smooth. Like if I have to put in my phone number and it already goes to the number pad, beautiful, but we overlook those tiny details.
Mhm.
But those are really the make or break of making a user stick around and enjoy using that app.
Yeah. As an impatient person, an annoying UX, like, I will quit the app. Like, I've quit
Right.
many apps because I'm like, "This doesn't work for me." Like, this is annoying and it doesn't make sense. And, the phone thing that you mentioned also, like, they design it for the computer, but then the mobile app obviously is a different interface. Like, how are people using it on mobile? And even just text fields, like, there's so many forms where, like, something will be required, and then, like, for a lot of people, that thing doesn't exist, and you're like, "Okay, well, like, what do I do?" And then I feel like the most common example is obviously, you put in your password and then it tells you it doesn't exist, and you put in your username and it's like, "No, already exists," that kind of thing. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of that, and talking about the leveraging, concepts already, I think that's really important because sometimes there's this instinct to, like, be so innovative that you're, like, so different, and it's like, yeah, there's some things we don't need to reinvent. Like, I need to know where the X button is. Like,
Hmm.
how do I get out of this thing? And there's so many tools that are just overcomplicating it. So I think that's actually a really good call out for that.
Yeah.
So
If
yeah, go
if
ahead.
I may add real quick, something that came to mind, another real world analogy is a Swiss Army knife. It's fantastic in theory, but honestly, for home projects, I find myself only using a Swiss Army knife in those emergency situations. Like, if I'm out in the middle of the nowhere and it's in my
Yeah.
truck, I have it as backup. But if I'm gonna do something intentionally, I always go to my toolbox. I would rather have the right tool for the task than a catch-all that does
Yeah.
everything very mediocre.
And what's been kind of driving me crazy lately? I feel like this is just gonna be a vent session on UX. Don't worry,
Yeah.
we'll get to the tips. I feel like so many platforms are trying to make this all-in-one mentality where
Mhm.
it's hooked up to every other app. And it seems good in theory, but, like, if you don't do that intentionally, all you're doing is sending me around to different places, and like, it often just makes the experience more complicated, and I feel like That's, something I'm seeing a lot lately, like, especially on the cybersecurity side, like, so many apps are just, like, throwing APIs at each other, and it's like, well, like, what is the goal? Like, what's the goal here? Like, should these things be connected? And, like, let's talk about how. One question I have for you, because I know you guys build a lot of, like, new tech, but when you're dealing with, like, legacy tech, like, if someone comes to you and it's just kinda, like, already built and it's kind of a mess and doesn't really work, but you have real world constraints like budgets and time and everything else, how do you kinda balance that human touch there?
That's a great question. First and foremost, when we're people first, you have to consider the emotional side too. So the first thing that I consider is, man, this client, their whole business, they're stressed out. They've tried things and it's not working well, and they're frustrated
Yeah.
coming to us. And we're really a last resort. So that has to be considered in everything that we do. And since emotions are high, we take an extra step to do a code review, look under the hood, make sure what we're doing is going to be the right approach. I'll measure 3 times in this case and cut once because we really cannot afford to cut again. And sometimes I do have to break that hard news of we have to start from scratch.
Mhm.
But I have to think about the long term because this is where they're at and this needs to be done very intentionally.
Yeah, and, it's the same on the cybersecurity side, like, sometimes there's, like, this, like, like, shame around it, or there's just, like, a lot of emotions at play, like you said, and, I think it's really important that companies and services like both of ours, like, meet people where they're at, like, this is the reality, so the solution based on this reality is this, there's a lot of companies that, will give out this crazy game plan that is never gonna work for this startup, so it's just kinda meeting people where they're at. If you know, if 1111 is all their passwords, like, let's just start there, like, easy first step, and that's a win, and then after that win, we'll kinda work through the journey of it, and, it's the same on the software side, like, it doesn't well, this is hard for my perfectionist team, but, it doesn't have to be perfect in the very first iteration, like, let's start
Right.
building it, let's get people using it, see how it works, see what's like, kinda get some real feedback. Because for a while, we were building stuff very completely before we were, really getting external people looking at it, and it was taking us so much longer, so, really building that intentionally with that in mind.
Yeah, that minimal viable product approach.
It's hard, though. It's hard for some you just
I
wanna keep
use
it happy.
Facebook as an example all the time because I mean, Facebook now is such a catch-all, but back in the day, it started as only college students, like that small of a scope. And that's truly what we have to do. There's a great book on this, actually. It's called Zero to One. And it talks about how you got to test market fit first. And as challenging as that is, and I'm not trying to, stomp on any dreams, I want that end dream, but it takes money and resources, and I want to make sure it's worth the time. I think it would be even worse to, sell somebody snake oil and then we turn around and it's not even having traction.
Yeah, and it's hard when you have teams that, have that dream and there's so many things they wanna do, and it's like, "Okay, well, let's do the one thing really well," which is another book, like, which one is it that has the hedgehog concept? I never remember which book it is. One of the common ones, and it's just like, the hedgehog is not good at a lot of things, but he is good at this one thing, and that is, like, being spiky and stopping predators, and that's all he's good at, but he's really good at it, and that's how he survived, and I think about that a lot is like, what is the one thing we wanna be really good at? And then we can, build upon that and grow and expand, but, like, what's that core thing? Um, so, yeah, I think that's a good call out. And when something does get, like, there's a bug or something gets broken or some kinda ticket comes in, is there a way to kinda distinguish between user error and a change needing to be made in the tech, or how do you look at that?
Well, I always assume it's not user error. let's
Okay.
let's start there. And always assume that there is a genuine issue there and we ask follow-up questions. There is some amount of client education in the tech world because I want them to
Which is
own their
also
system.
our responsibility. It's also
It
our
is.
responsibility to teach how to use the platform, yeah.
Absolutely. So asking, what device they're using, what version of the app we're using, making sure we have that version number at the bottom. What phone are you using? Because it might not be, if I'm using an iPhone 5, I'm not sure how far that can go anymore. Um, really starting there and then reproducing the issue, asking them step by step what you're using. And this is assuming this is close testing. Now, if it's a live system, we're assuming a lot more things because at
Mhm.
that point it's a full production system. That information is more directly known.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I think again, like when it comes to security, like there's so many things that we build and then we expect the humans to do correctly, like permissions. We make permissions so easy to just open up to everyone. Like, and then we're mad when people make everything public and then now it's a vulnerability. And it's like, well, maybe like certain people should have certain permissions and like maybe we shouldn't grant access to everyone. And, but there's ways to, you know, do that. That's not, you're not blaming the human. It's not, you're not assuming incompetence in the human, which I think is where our brains go a lot when we use phrases like user error and humans are your biggest vulnerability. And it's for the record, it's something I used to say. I used to say that in some of my panels and stuff. And I've really intentionally the last few years been trying to step away from that because at the end of the day, like think about in like back before tech, in the retail world, you hear like the customer's always right. Right. Like that kind
Mm,
of mentality. And like, yes, obviously that's not always true. But I think in tech, it's like the customer's never right. Like we kind of take this assumption that we are always the correct one and they're always the user error. So yeah, I think it's really interesting how your company specifically like takes that human element so seriously because at the end of the day, we're building the app for this person. So like let's make it work for that person.
exactly.
Yeah. So and I know like that kind of rolls into like holistic systems, which is something that you talk a lot about and is important to Tepia. So how does your company kind of think in terms of holistic systems? How do you kind of build that culture among your team? And if you want to talk about like what holistic thinking is in terms of systems also.
Absolutely. Holistic thinking is looking at the entire picture. So not just looking at in tech, I can say a particular feature, analogy, medical, you have a DO, which is more holistic versus an MD is more scientific. I am not in the medical profession, so if I said something ignorant there, how we approach this goes back down to fundamental DevOps approach. But this was approach, I think, around 2007, 2008. This really became a widely known mentality. My title used to be Director of DevOps because I'm so passionate about this topic, actually, because it does talk about the approach in a holistic point of view, small batch sizes, limited exposure so you don't have a crazy amount of regression. Microservice architecture used to be the main standard for many, many years. Now, that's not always true. Architectures can vary based on your use case, but microservice architecture still stands very strong. In layman's terms, microservice architecture is basically having all your features and tools separated out so they're not conflicting with each other. So then you can handle things in a very controlled manner because when you take a step back and look at it holistically, your whole system can't go down because you did an update.
Yeah,
Yes,
holistic
this
doesn't mean everything's mashed together. It
right,
means you're doing it with an intention, which is actually sometimes the opposite. It's a lot more segmentation a lot of the time.
right, yeah. Just
Yeah.
the same as, all these departments. There's a reason why we separate out, HR from the sales team, from the operations team. There's an intention there, and it's just applying the same concept in the tech.
Yeah, and I think, something we kinda confuse sometimes, back in the day when the assembly line was created, I think was it Ford that it was an insane spike in efficiency,
Mhm.
and the assembly line thing works for a lot of things, and there are places in business for that, But then we kind of like, there's a lot of businesses that just took it too far. And it's like their teams are totally siloed and they never communicate. And I think we see that knowledge silo on both sides, specifically with, we try to tell everyone like security shouldn't just be among the developers. Like you should be having those conversations among sales and HR and finance because they're the ones that are going to more likely be hit by phishing and stuff.
Right.
Like, so security should be everyone's job. But then to the same point, users have to be everyone's job too. Like developers have to know your clients and know like these conversations. And um, so it goes both ways. Like I think it's hard to balance efficiency in team segmentation and having your team, you know, really build intentionally and sell intentionally and all of that. But it's a hard balance for sure. And I think a lot of us kind of go back and forth a little bit and maybe we overcorrect one way and then we come back and try to figure that out.
I think that's a really great point. I like how you brought up sales too, because we really do start this human first approach in the sales process as well too. Like we
Mhm.
do say we require a level of security, and sometimes people will say, "Oh, well, why do I need security if this is just going to be an internal tool?" And that
Yeah.
education starts up front, because nowadays you're not just owning a piece of tech, it's an integration in your system, it's an integration in your business. It could be a business all on its own. So that education is
Mm.
very, very important. It's the same as whenever you're buying insurance. You need to understand deductibles. You need to understand if you have a high or a low deductible, how it all comes together so the policy can be fit for you.
Yeah. It's just kind of easier to silo it over there sometimes and just like, it's probably fine. I don't have to think about taxes or insurance. Someone's handling it. And yeah, it'll come back to bite you. And I think what I'm seeing, especially in testing, is that even when companies have holistic thinking and they build these good systems, there's still a lot of siloed testing. Like almost everyone that comes to us they get a couple different test types, but there's very few like red team engagements, like where
Mm,
people are like, hey, test our entire company. We do a lot of social engineering tests, but those again are like separate. And it's like, yeah, we can test and see who's going to fall for phishing, but, like, it would be better if we could do that and then get into the web app and show you, like, this entire system and the holistic hacking experience. So that's something I'd like to kind of educate more on and try to get more people to kind of round out how they're testing and just take that holistic mindset and really apply it to that too. Is there anything kind of take away, anything to teams either starting out and they want to start building in this direction, or teams that have legacy code that want to move more toward, human-led engineering? Any tips or final thoughts for those people?
I would definitely say it's intimidating, because you're gonna potentially lose more customers this way. But I would argue lean into that uncomfortability, because it builds a higher trust. It builds a higher quality. And at the end of the day, it's something that you can have more personal fulfillment in. You know for sure what you're selling is going to make an impact. And that is more satisfying than profits at the end of the day. To help somebody out, to genuinely make an impact, to change somebody's world, you might help the next entrepreneur break through, or you might help this existing enterprise company hit their next milestone. And that's more gratifying than trying to please everybody. Just doing it right and doing it honestly.
No, I love that, and anyone listening can tell Brianna is so passionate about this stuff, and if you have any questions or anything, I'm gonna share her information. If you wanna talk to Tepia about the kind of work they do, they develop these tools for you sometimes, like, they can help you with this software development process, or if you just wanna reach out to Brianna on, like, how to implement this in your team, please do. I'm gonna link all their information. Brianna, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and looking forward to hearing back from everybody.
Alright, thanks.
Take care.